Hey guys, Jason and Andrew here, and we are back with our second season of TCG deck profiles. Today's deck is going to feature this guy, Pincer Scarab, but we're calling it Lost Soul Beat because the original conceit of the deck is that we wanted to design a beatdown deck that could make good use of Lost Soul. So basically, you break all of your opponent's shields, and then you hit them with Lost Soul, and then they lose all of their cards. Now, we were originally wanting to build that as like a Fighter Dual Fang deck, since Fighter Dual Fang sort of curves into Lost Soul, but we were also independently conceptualizing a Pincer Scarab deck, and then it just got to a point where we merged the two concepts because of an idea Andrew had from Duel Masters Plays.
Yeah, so this guy, some of you will recognize him from the early days of DMP. A lot of people actually played him. Which was pretty surprising because back then when I saw this card I was like, this must be an OCG card. But it turns out it's not. And its effect, it gains power for every card that your opponent has in his hand. Now you might be thinking, since the deck is called Lost Soul Beat, why would you run this since this card gets power from cards being in your opponent's hand and Lost Soul, gets rid of all your opponent's cards. But our reasoning is Lost Soul usually comes out a bit later in the game. This guy, you drop in on turn 4, you start swinging all your opponent's shields. By the time you reach turn 7 and you get to play a Lost Soul, your opponent won't have any shields anyway, so his effect isn't as important. So starting off, we of course have 4 copies of Pincer Scarab. He's the main mascot, and the whole deck is revolved around, playing him as soon as possible. And then you can start swinging. So when you have 4 mana cards, the best way to get them out is of course playing Poisonous Mushroom. So Poisonous Mushroom on 2, you charge a card, next turn you can play out Pincer Scarab.
We originally had 4 copies of Fairy Life in one of the earlier versions of the deck, but when we thought about it, we were like, there's no real way to super consistently hit Pincer Scarab on turn 3. Because with this current arrangement, it's kind of like, if we happen to open with both Pincer Scarab and Poisonous Mushroom, then that can be a really strong way to start the game. But even if you have, say, like, 4 Poisonous Mushroom and 4 Fairy Life, chances are, Pincer Scarab, 4 copies out of 40 cards, you're probably not going to find it, so there isn't really a way to reasonably... Fairy Life isn't going to really improve your chances of a turn 3 Pincer Scarab significantly.
Yeah. And you'll also see why having the Poisonous Mushroom body also helps a lot with Lucky Ball that you'll see as well. For our Beast Folk, since this deck does run Fighter Dual Fang, we're running 4 copies of Quixotic, almost forgot the name. And then 4 copies of Bronze Arm for more mana acceleration. And then of course, Return of the King. 3 copies of Fighter Dual Fang. Now, Jason, why are we not running 4 copies?
The reason we're not running 4 copies of Fighter Dual Fang is because we just needed to make space to play more cards. As simple as that. But yeah, it might be interesting to see, well, you're playing Pincer Scarab and you're playing Fighter Dual Fang. Why are you playing so many boss cards? And the way we rationalized it is Pincer Scarab is a card that kind of works best if it has a backup attacker. Because if you are only running your 4 Pincer Scarabs, it's a card that's sort of easy to play around, and once your opponent manages to, say, hit turn 5 or 6, Chlorile Tear Pit, get rid of it, then you kind of run out of steam from there. Whereas if Pincer Scarab has Fighter Dual Fang backing him up, then you can really seriously apply some pressure to your opponent. And I think in the Duel Masters Plays version of the deck, we had Pincer Scarab alongside Twin Cannon and or Fighter Dual Fang. Yeah. So yeah, Pincer Scarab just seemed like one of those cards to us that needed to be supported by another big beat stick.
Yeah, there are ways to play around Pincer Scarab, so sometimes he's not as strong as you want him to be, so you need some other guys to help out. So back in DMP, we had Titan Giant, which gave nature a source of draw. But of course, this isn't DMP. We do have to play water for our draw source. So playing 4 copies of Alcoholcus, 3 copies of Energy Stream, and 3 copies of Lucky Ball. Back before I mentioned that for Poisonous Mushroom, another reason why we like Poisonous Mushroom is that he can break shields for Lucky Ball. So you get that a bit easier if you say you don't hit your Pincer Scarab that early. To round out water, we also have, of course, our trigs, 4 copies of Aqua Surfer in every water deck.
Yeah, Aqua Hulkus, Aqua Surfer, and oftentimes Energy Stream, they just seem like a really solid water core for these beatdown / mid-range type of decks. And one of the things that we originally had in our first version was we had 4 Lucky Ball and we had 0 Energy Stream. And I think, some people might say, well, Energy Stream it's a great control card because, no field presence, but you build up card advantage. But I think Energy Stream is pretty important because with this sort of deck, you want to keep playing creatures or cards every turn. And, well, with Energy Stream, you get 2 new cards, right? And you have a lot of cheap bodies, so it helps a lot with that. Especially with Poisonous Mushroom, you deplete your hand, so Energy Stream fills it right back up. And, sometimes Lucky Ball isn't the most reliable thing because your opponent might sometimes have blockers, which are big, and your 1k creatures can't get over them. So Lucky Ball just becomes a brick. Well, Energy Stream can probably help you find your outs, like your boss cards, for example.
To round off our deck, we have 4 copies of Terror Pit to cap off our trigs, and then, of course, 3 copies of Lost Soul. I guess there's not much to say about this. The core concept of this deck is that you ramp your mana, break a lot of shields with Pincer Scarab, and then you play out your Lost Soul.
This deck has a pretty low darkness count, especially for a 3-civ deck. 7 out of your 40 cards are darkness, but we figure it's not really that big of a problem because we can go through our cards pretty quickly. You can see all the mana ramp and all the draw in this deck. And also, if you notice, all of these cost 6 and 7. So by the time we hit 6 or 7 mana, we probably should have come across a darkness mana by then. So here's the deck in its entirety. As touched on earlier, the general strategy or flow of the deck is to flood the board with your creatures, use them to build advantage, and then hopefully you can summon one of your boss cards, Pincer Scarab, Fighter Dual Fang, and then start swinging for your opponent's shields. There might be situations where you won't want to break straight away. It'll obviously depend on what you're holding. Sometimes if you have, say, a lot of ramp, it might be more worthwhile to not swing until you can summon Fighter Dual Fang if you can hit him on turn 4 or 5. But, if you don't find one of your boss cards or if you only have Pincer Scarab, then maybe it's better to just break early so you can activate Lucky Ball. Ultimately, get bodies on the board and then swing opportunistically.
Yeah, and then play Lost Soul. Yeah, so regarding matchups, I think this deck does pretty well across the board. I think this is one of those decks that just kind of runs itself if you get out an earlier Pincer Scarab, and if your opponent can't deal with it, say he doesn't run any hard removal, it's pretty hard to deal with.
But because this deck is it's very solid, but it's not what I would consider unbeatable. It's also what we use as our control variable when we test
it's a pretty good control variable. Yeah, so yeah, it's a ton of fun. I think I just really like seeing this guy back.
Yeah, everybody loves Fighter Dual Fang.
Yeah, we were trying so hard before to include him in our old decks, but we just couldn't find a spot for him. I think he always turned out to be a bit misplaced. You just couldn't find a proper role. You always think there's other better cards to play instead of him. But in this deck, he works perfectly.
Now, for other options, in case you want to pilot a deck that operates on a similar premise but make some adjustments, I think one route you could take is you could remove some of the cheaper weenies and play some Radioactive Horn, which is another very early double breaker. That card's a ton of fun. Holy Awe is another card that I think would fit pretty well into this sort of deck. I think you would need to do a lot of manipulation in the 6 to 7 drop section. It could get very clunky, but I think Holy Awe is a reasonable fit. Yeah. And if you really don't like blockers, because, sometimes like a big wall of blockers can be a bit frustrating to get through, another option you could do is you could throw in some Aqua Guards, some Crystal Paladins, like the early OCG decks of old. We are running a lot of Liquid people already. I think they are very reasonable inclusions as well.
Yeah, so also just jumping on Jason's point about Holy Awe, if you do decide to run Holy Awe, also consider Mana Nexus. That combo was also quite good.
Yeah. Well, there you have it, our first deck of Season 2. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and I hope you guys are looking forward to the other spicy lists we have in store for you. But that's all for now. Thank you guys for watching. Stay safe, and we'll see you guys next time.